At 0127 hours, the tanker burned like a floating city on fire, a 300-meter hull throwing orange light across black water, and the radio traffic out of the Persian Gulf turned from routine to raw panic in a single breath. The night was thick with haze, low cloud pressed down like a lid. A northwesterly wind at 17 knots drove short chop against the tanker's flank, slapping hot steel with cold water and turning every impact into hissing steam. Humidity hung heavy, smearing optics and making distant navigation lights bloom into halos. Visibility was 5 nautical miles toward open water, worse toward the coastline where shore glow blurred the horizon into a faint, dirty smear. The smell carried even across the sea. Burning fuel, scorched paint, and the metallic bite of overheated steel. Then the mayday came again. Different voice this time, quieter, shaking. Mayday. We have fire amidships. Possible boarding. We are losing control. Crew trapped. Repeat, crew trapped. And beneath the words was another sound. Intermittent gunfire, distant but unmistakable, popping through the wind like punctuation. I'm your host at World Defense, where we break down the operations shaping global security. And what happened when a SEAL team inserted on a burning tanker wasn't just another maritime rescue. It was a wake-up call for any fleet that thinks the sea is only about missiles and warships, and for any adversary who believes chaos is a shield. The tanker's name didn't matter to the men listening on the net. What mattered was what it represented. A massive civilian vessel inside a contested corridor near the Strait of Hormuz, carrying energy cargo that the world needed and the region's proxies loved to weaponize. The ship had been moving southbound along the traffic separation scheme when it abruptly lost speed, deviated off lane, and reported fire. In a normal sea, that's an accident. In this sea, at this hour, it was a trap until proven otherwise. The aggressor that night was Iran's proxy network operating under the cover of maritime confusion, fast patrol boats and a disguised boarding element using civilian traffic as camouflage, backed by shore-based surveillance and coordination. The vessel type at the heart of the threat was not a frigate. It was small craft, fast inshore attack boats capable of 44 knots, able to close range in minutes, carrying heavy machine guns, rockets, and the kind of explosive charges that turn a tanker's deck into a furnace. The location was the Persian Gulf near the Hormuz approaches, where traffic is dense enough to hide intent and narrow enough to make rescue feel like combat. Inside the US Navy picture, the response was already forming before the words "possible boarding" finished crossing the radio. A carrier strike group operated in a broader box west of the Strait with a layered escort screen. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers on forward arcs, a cruiser acting as command and air defense brain, and an E-2D advanced Hawkeye overhead feeding a fused picture so no single ship fought blind. MH-60R Seahawks rotated on patrol stations, because in these waters, helicopters are the fastest way to turn uncertainty into certainty. A naval special warfare element was embarked for precisely the scenario most people never imagine. A contested maritime rescue where the threat isn't a missile, it's men. At 0128 hours and 11 seconds, the first US warship to answer the mayday transmitted on Maritime Guard, calm and professional. Vessel in distress, this is United States Navy. State your position and nature of emergency. Confirm if hostile boarding in progress. The tanker's reply was fragmented, broken by static and coughing. Position, grid follows, fire on deck. Armed men, we cannot. The transmission cut. That cut mattered. Fires don't cut radios cleanly. People do. At 0128 hours and 37 seconds, the Hawkeye overhead called what its sensors already suggested. Contact cluster near distressed vessel. Multiple small surface craft bearing 072, range 6 nautical miles, speed 40 knots, converging. Possible hostile. 6 nautical miles at 40 knots is 9 minutes, and 9 minutes is a lifetime if you're in a steel labyrinth filling with smoke. In the Iranian boats, confidence was sharp and dangerous. Their commanders believed they had engineered the perfect dilemma. If the US stayed back, civilians would die and commerce would freeze. If the US moved in, it would do so inside a messy, politically explosive incident zone where every shot could be framed as escalation. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted to show the world the Gulf could be set on fire with small craft and nerve. They did not expect the US to treat it as both rescue and combat at the same time. What they didn't know was that the US Navy had already been tracking the aggressor for 48 hours using surveillance assets. 2 days earlier, satellite imagery and pattern of life analysis had flagged unusual small craft movements out of multiple coastal inlets. Bursts of departures at odd hours, returns without normal fishing signatures, and vehicle staging near waterside launch points consistent with a coordinated operation. A P-8 Poseidon had mapped the surface picture at standoff range, correlating wake behavior and comms bursts. Signals intelligence had caught short, disciplined transmissions on maritime handheld frequencies, the kind used for tactical coordination, not commerce. The strike group had been briefed that a commercial incident could be the cover for a boarding attempt designed to ignite a tanker and trigger a crisis. The US didn't know which hull would be chosen, but it knew the playbook. So when the tanker burned, the Americans didn't ask if it was a trap. They asked where the trap's teeth were. At 0129 hours, the strike group commander issued the order that set 2 operations running in parallel. Secure sea space. Begin rescue insertion. Do not allow hostile craft inside the incident bubble. The sea space security piece moved first. At 0129 hours and 18 seconds, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer increased speed to 24 knots and turned toward the tanker's position to create an outer ring. Its spy radar refined the small craft tracks. Electro-optical systems picked up heat blooms from engines and muzzle flashes from one boat's bow. The destroyer broadcast a warning. Unidentified small craft near distressed vessel. This is United States Navy warship. Stop your approach. Turn away immediately. No compliance. The craft kept closing. At 0129 hours and 44 seconds, an MH-60R Seahawk on patrol station shifted from surface surveillance to immediate overwatch. It dropped to a lower altitude and put FLIR on the boats, reading the picture like a ledger. Weapon mounts visible, crew clustered, one craft towing something low profile, potentially an unmanned explosive skiff or boarding ladder platform. The helicopter's crew sounded like technicians because that is what professionals sound like in a moment that could kill civilians. Multiple armed craft. One appears to have boarding equipment. Recommend disable on threshold. The strike group did not wait for the threshold to become impact. At 0130 hours and 07 seconds, the destroyer fired a controlled warning burst into the water 150 meters ahead of the lead boat. Splashes walked in a straight line across its approach lane like a ruler. The boat hesitated for a fraction of a second, then accelerated again. That was the line. At 0130 hours and 19 seconds, the destroyer executed precision disablement. Rounds struck the craft's engine housing. Its wake collapsed. Speed fell from 41 knots to 12 in 6 seconds. The boat yawed hard and began drifting in the chop, still armed but no longer controlling range. The other boats reacted immediately, splitting outward like a startled school of fish, trying to force the destroyer to choose targets while staying inside the incident zone's chaos. The US refused the choice. At 0130 hours and 36 seconds, the Seahawk fired another warning burst into the water along the crossing path of a second boat. It turned away. A third boat kept closing. At 0130 hours and 49 seconds, the destroyer disabled it as well, punching out propulsion and turning a threat into drifting wreckage. The sea space ring began to hold. Now the rescue could happen. At 0131 hours, the second operation started, insertion. A naval special warfare team was already staged on a nearby US ship. A small group of operators trained for maritime interdiction, hostage rescue, and the kind of violent environment a burning tanker becomes. Their mission was not to be heroes. It was to find out what was on that ship, rescue the crew, and prevent the tanker from becoming a strategic weapon. Because a burning tanker is more than a fire. It is a signal. It is leverage. It is a weaponized narrative. At 0131 hours and 22 seconds, the MH-60R assigned to insertion lifted, rotor wash shredding the haze into swirling ribbons. The helicopter carried the team, gear, thermal devices, breaching tools, and one overriding priority: speed. The tanker's fire was spreading and smoke inhalation kills faster than bullets. At 0132 hours, as the helicopter closed, the scale of the blaze became visible even through the night haze. Flames rolled from amidships vents in the deck pipeline area, glowing in hot sheets. The superstructure windows reflected orange like a city burning. Crew lifeboats hung half-lowered, frozen in place. The ship's deck lights were dead. The only illumination came from fire, flares, and the harsh white beam of the Seahawk's searchlight. On the net, the pilot's voice tightened. Approaching casualty vessel, heavy smoke, deck fire, looking for insertion point. A tanker is a maze. Catwalks, ladders, valves, bulkheads, pipe racks, compartments. In daylight, it's complex. In smoke, it's lethal. And if hostile boarders were still on board, it was lethal in two ways at once. At 0132 hours and 41 seconds, the first surprise hit the SEAL team's headset, a burst of radio traffic not from the tanker, but from the shore. Short, disciplined transmissions, a coordinator voice, bearings triangulated quickly by U.S. electronic support. It was not a random pirate attack. It was command and control. The U.S. ships didn't need to hear the words. They needed to know the behavior, and the behavior said planned operation. At 0133 hours, the insertion helicopter found the deck section forward of the Blaze, a catwalk area with enough clearance to fast rope. The team leader's voice came over the intercom, flat and focused. Green light, we go now. At 0133 hours and 12 seconds, the first operator dropped down the rope into hot air and smoke. Boots hit steel. He moved immediately to the side, making room. The second followed. The third. The rope swayed with wind and rotor wash. Heat shimmered. The team spread, weapons up, lights low, thermal scanning. They were on a burning tanker in contested water, and the first thing they saw was not fire. It was evidence. A breech charge wrapper. Fresh. Not crew equipment. A cut lock on a deck hatch. A handheld radio with a frequency set not to maritime guard, but to a tactical channel. The team leader felt the moment shift in his gut. This wasn't armed men. This was organized. At 0133 hours and 48 seconds, the team moved toward the superstructure access. Smoke curled around ladders like fingers. Fire alarms screamed. The ship's internal public address system crackled and died in a loop. Somewhere deeper inside, a man was pounding on a steel door, not to fight, but to be heard. Help, we are here, engine control. The team followed the sound. At 0134 hours, the first hostile contact appeared, not in a dramatic ambush, but as a silhouette at the end of a passageway, weapon low, face mask moving with urgency. When the silhouette saw the beam of a weapon light, it froze for half a beat. Then it ran. The SEALs didn't chase blindly. In a tanker, chasing into smoke is how you die. They held angles, moved as a unit, and focused on the mission, crew first, hostile second. At 0134 hours and 29 seconds, they reached the engine control room access. The door was hot to the touch. Smoke leaked from seams. Inside, crew voices shouted in multiple languages, terrified and exhausted. The door mechanism was damaged, either by fire or by deliberate sabotage. The team leader did not hesitate. Breach. A controlled charge popped. The door blew open in a cough of smoke. The SEALs went in. What they found shocked the Pentagon later, not because it was dramatic, but because it was strategic. Inside the engine control space, the crew wasn't just trapped. They had been separated, tied, and left with a timer. An improvised explosive device wired to a valve manifold control panel set to ignite a secondary fire in the fuel transfer lines, a design meant to ensure the tanker burned longer, hotter, and harder to extinguish. Next to it, a second device aimed at the ship's emergency communications panel, designed to keep distress calls fragmented and slow, and in a corner, a small rugged laptop in a waterproof case, connected to a commercial satellite uplink device, sending intermittent data bursts. This was not piracy. This was targeting. The boarders weren't stealing cargo. They were turning the tanker into an information weapon. Burning hull on camera, panic on radio, trade frozen, insurance spiking, political pressure rising. And the laptop was the proof. At 0135 hours and 12 seconds, the team leader transmitted the first short report that would later change briefings in Washington. Hostile devices found. Looks like planned sabotage. Sat uplink present. Possible live feed or telemetry. We are disarming. At 0135 hours and 26 seconds, a second voice, calm and authoritative, came back from the U.S. ship. Copy. Prioritize crew extraction. EOD en route. Secure evidence. EOD en route mattered, but time mattered more. If the valve manifold charge fired, the tanker could become a rolling inferno that no rescue could touch. At 0135 hours and 49 seconds, the SEALs began moving crew out in groups, guiding them through smoke with thermal cues and hand signals. Some were burned. Some were coughing blood from inhalation. One was carrying a crewmate who couldn't walk. The SEALs didn't drag. They moved with controlled speed because panic creates bottlenecks, and bottlenecks get people killed. At 0136 hours, outside on deck, the sea space fight continued. Iranian fast boats that had been disabled were drifting, and 2 remaining boats had repositioned farther out, trying to stay just beyond disable range while filming with handheld devices. They wanted evidence. They wanted to capture US presence and frame it as escalation. The US didn't give them the picture. An MH-60R Overwatch helicopter moved between them and the tanker, its searchlights sweeping, its presence forcing the boats to keep distance. The destroyer maintained a hard ring. Another US warship joined to widen coverage. The incident bubble hardened into a protected box. At 0136 hours and 22 seconds, the Hawkeye called a new development. Additional small craft departing coast. Range 26 nautical miles. Speed increasing. Likely reinforcement. Iran was trying to flood the zone with more boats, but now the US had the advantage of clarity. The attack had been identified as an organized sabotage operation. The insertion was underway. The crew was being recovered. The aggressors' small craft were being boxed. The US could now choose to end the reinforcement attempt quickly. At 0136 hours and 49 seconds, the lead destroyer broadcast a final warning to the inbound reinforcement craft. Iranian small craft, stop now. Do not approach the incident area. No compliance. At 0137 hours and 11 seconds, controlled warning bursts walked across the water ahead of the lead craft. 2 turned away immediately. A third kept coming for 3 more seconds, stubborn or ordered, and then broke hard when a second burst cut closer. The reinforcement wave dissolved. The sea space remained controlled. Inside the tanker's passageways, the SEALs pushed toward the source of the fire. Not to fight the fire. That was a firefighter's war, but to find the devices that kept feeding it. Fires on tankers can be engineered. A sabotaged valve can route fuel into the wrong place and keep flames alive no matter how much foam you spray. At 0137 hours and 38 seconds, the team found the second shock. A deliberately opened bypass line feeding fuel vapor into a deck vent area, turning the ship's own systems into a flamethrower. The valve wheel had been forced. Tool marks were fresh. This was engineering sabotage, not accidental damage. The team transmitted again. Sabotage confirmed. Bypass opened, fire being fed. Recommend shut in and isolate. At 0138 hours, EOD arrived by helicopter hoist insertion onto a safer deck section. They moved fast, working in smoke with clipped communication, because disarming charges in a burning environment is not a puzzle. It is a race against heat and time. At 0139 hours, the first device was rendered safe. At 0139 hours and 41 seconds, the satellite uplink was seized and bagged. At 0140 hours, the bypass valve was partially secured, reducing fuel feed and starving the fire by degrees. The tanker did not stop burning instantly, but the nature of the fire changed. The roaring sheet flames began to shrink into localized pockets. Smoke density shifted. The orange glow softened at the edges. That was the moment everyone on board understood the fire was no longer winning. At 0141 hours, the crew extraction accelerated. The SEALs guided the last trapped engineers and deckhands toward a deck muster point where hoist operations could pull them off without forcing them through the worst heat. A Seahawk hovered, rescue strop swinging. One by one, exhausted men rose into the air, faces streaked with soot, eyes wide in disbelief. At 0142 hours and 19 seconds, the last confirmed crew member was lifted clear. Crew accounted, repeat, crew accounted, came across the net. The operational objective was achieved, but the strategic objective, the thing that would shock the Pentagon, was only becoming clear as analysts began reading the seized device. At 0144 hours, the laptop's data was reviewed briefly by a US signals specialist undercover. It contained more than a live feed. It contained pre-planned waypoints, a schedule, and a set of encrypted messages referencing an impact window aligned with global market open times. It included a contact list of numbers and handles tied to propaganda distribution channels. It included a simple map of the Strait with highlighted points labeled insurance panic, blockage, and strike response. This was not a tactical raid. It was an economic attack. The burning tanker was meant to be a lever on global prices and political pressure, not just a dramatic video clip. It was meant to trap ships by fear, drive insurers to suspend coverage, and force governments to argue while the Gulf looked ungovernable. And the US had just pulled the lever out of their hands. At 0146 hours, the US commander issued the final incident order. Maintain security bubble. Hand over tanker stabilization to firefighting assets. Continue tracking all small craft. Preserve evidence. The aggressor craft remained at distance, now uncertain. They had expected a slow response, confusion, maybe a delayed rescue. Instead, the US had inserted, extracted, seized evidence and disrupted the plan before the narrative could fully form. By 01:53 hours, the fire was decreasing under combined shipboard and supporting firefighting effort. The tanker was damaged, but not lost. The sea lane was tense, but not frozen. The global panic that had been planned was now blunted. The outcome was not a clean naval battle. It was something more modern. Dominance in the gray zone. A SEAL team inserted under fire and smoke. They found sabotage devices designed to prolong the blaze. They captured an uplink that proved coordination and intent. They extracted civilians alive. They denied an adversary the economic and propaganda victory. And the lesson is as sharp as the Strait itself. Modern maritime conflict is not only missiles and warships. It is the weaponization of commerce, fear, and narrative. A burning tanker can be a strategic strike if it freezes traffic and inflates prices. A sabotage team can do what a missile battery can't, create chaos without open war. But the other lesson is equally clear. When a fleet can fuse surveillance, control sea space, insert special operations, and seize evidence while extinguishing the narrative, the gray zone becomes just another battle space the stronger system can dominate. That night near Hormuz, the sea tried to become a weapon. The US Navy turned it back into a corridor, and the Pentagon learned the most dangerous threats are sometimes carried not on missiles, but on a laptop in a burning ship.